Not all problems can be solved with a trial by combat, so today we're going to look at how to create non-violent conflict in your stories. A number of my subscribers requested this video, so here's what we're going to do today. We'll discuss the different types of conflict, then we'll look at how to create the non-violent kind, and I'll wrap up the video with some tips that'll hammer everything home. Here's your spoiler warning. The ones in red contain the heaviest spoilers. Now let's start off by talking about the major types of conflict. I have 4 of them for you today. The first one is character versus opponent. And this is when you have a hero versus a villain, an ally, a total stranger, anyone who directly opposes the hero. You can have conflict between hero and villain, conflict between hero and pretty much any other human character. Second type of conflict is character versus society. And this can include society's institutions, it can include cultural expectations, it can include laws that dictate how your characters must live, it can even include things like technology and other world-building related things. Third type is character versus nature, and this includes things like weather, terrain, animals, monsters, and so on. And then the fourth type of conflict is character versus self. And this is, of course, internal conflict. And it might be the character versus temptation, or guilt, or self-doubt, or self-loathing, or any other number of things. And it's worth pointing out that all 4 of these types can be violent or non-violent. It's entirely up to you. All right, now let's talk about how to create non-violent conflict. And what's critical here is knowing your character's values, the things they stand for, fight for, and live for. Do they value respect, or love, or success, or safety, or money? There are tons of possibilities, but you need to decide on your character's values. And you need to make sure the audience understands those values. And then you need to create situations where those values are challenged or threatened. That's where conflict gets interesting, when values come into conflict and we see how characters act and react as a result. Now let's go back to those 4 major types of conflict and look at some examples. For character versus opponent, we'll take an example from Game of Thrones, which is of course a very violent TV show, but it doesn't always involve swords and bloodshed. Instead, you also have scenes where characters engage in verbal conflict. And remember, dialogue is action, and action creates conflict. Now I want to show you a scene involving Tyrion and his father Tywin. Tyrion has been disrespected his whole life, so he values love and respect. His father, meanwhile, is a man of pride who values his reputation and family legacy. These differing values create conflict because though Tyrion wants his father's respect, he doesn't get it. That's because Tywin hates his son. He hates him because not only did Tyrion kill Tywin's wife during childbirth, but Tyrion also embarrasses the Lannister family by being a dwarf and spending time in brothels. Now here's a dialogue exchange from season 3. Tyrion meets with his father and hopes to obtain the right to Casterly Rock, which is Lannister property that has been passed down in the family for generations. Pay attention to the dialogue here and how the 2 characters' values come into conflict.
I want what is mine by right. I am your son and lawful heir.
You want Casterly Rock?
It is mine by right.
And I would let myself be consumed by maggots before mocking the family name and making you heir to Casterly Rock. You who killed your mother to come into the world. You are an ill-made, spiteful little creature. But neither gods nor men will ever compel me to let you turn Casterly Rock into your whorehouse.
So as you can see, Tyrion wants to feel like a Lannister, but his father refuses to recognize him as one. Their values clash, and the conflict tears father and son further apart. Now for the next 3 types of conflict, I'll make them quick. For character versus society, a good example comes from the movie Thank You for Smoking. This is about a big tobacco lobbyist who values freedom of choice, and he constantly finds himself at odds with a society that wants to limit that freedom. For character versus nature, look at the movie Castaway. The main character's plane crashes, he gets stranded on a deserted island, and survival then becomes the thing he values most. Nature threatens to break his spirit, and he has to learn to embrace nature in order to survive. Finally, for character versus self, look at Terminator 2. Now, when you think Terminator movies, you think action, but part of what makes T2 so good is Sarah Connor and her conflicting values. On one hand, she hates machines because one tried to kill her in the previous movie, and yet on the other hand, she needs to trust the T-800 in order to to help her and her son survive. So always remember to be aware of what your characters value and then put those values at stake over the course of the story. Alright, now I've got 4 tips for writing non-violent conflict. And the first one is to build conflict around your story's theme. I've talked about theme on the channel recently, and it's like the glue that holds all your story elements together. If you know your central theme or themes, you can build strong, focused conflict with or without violence. One non-violent example comes from Little Miss Sunshine. In this movie, a little girl qualifies for a beauty pageant, and her wacky family goes on a road trip to support her. Now, the story's core theme deals with what defines winners and losers. Each character searches for their own version of success, and everyone ends up losing at some point. Conflict arises not only when the characters fail, but also when they become critical of each other's goals and shortcomings. They attack each other in order to feel better about themselves and momentarily feel like winners. But this, of course, only leads to more conflict, which is great for the story. Tip number 2, use dialogue to create and build conflict. The spoken word can hit as hard as any haymaker, and a verbal back and forth can create conflict and raise the stakes while characters attack and defend each other's values. For example, take a look at the opening scene from The Godfather. The movie begins with a father wanting justice after his daughter has been beaten up by her boyfriend and his friends. He values justice, and in order to get that justice, he goes to see Don Corleone, and he asks the Don to do something about the men who hurt her. Now, when the Don finally speaks, he says this:
"Why did you go to the police? Why didn't you come to me first?"
That's a powerful line, and it signals that Don Corleone values respect and that he's the one in charge here. The father then begs the Don to kill the men who harmed his daughter, but the Don is offended by the request.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel, for help. I can't remember the last time that you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee.
Finally, the father offers to pay the Don to have the men beaten up. But money is an insult to the Don. He wants respect.
What have I ever done to make you treat me so disrespectfully? If you'd come to me in friendship, then the scum that ruined your daughter would be suffering this very day.
The scene wraps up with both characters getting what they value. The Don gets respect, and the father gets a promise that there will be justice. Tip number 3, remember that the threat of violence can be more impactful than violence itself. This is kind of like how in horror movies you don't want to show the monster. Instead, you want to give the audience an idea of the monster and let them imagine the worst possible creature. This same strategy works with violence, and it especially works well in action-heavy stories when you want to cool things down a bit while still maintaining the tension. For example, in Season 1 of 24, Jack Bauer is trying to locate the terrorists who plan to assassinate a presidential candidate. At one point, he captures a man with ties to the terrorists, but the guy refuses to give up any info. Now, Jack could probably break the guy's fingers one by one until he talks, but instead Jack recognizes that the man is a white-collar guy who isn't accustomed to physical pain. Jack then decides to threaten violence rather than inflict it, and he's able to intimidate the guy with a wet towel and some gruesome details.
You probably don't think that I could force this towel down your throat. But trust me, I can. All the way. Except I hold on to this one little bit at the end. When your stomach starts to digest it, I pull it out, taking your stomach lining with it. Most people, they take about a week to die. It's very painful.
Finally, tip number 4 is to apply conflict from different angles. One of the better strategies for building conflict involves the idea of 4 corners opposition. This idea comes from John Truby's book, The Anatomy of Story, and if you want to read more about it, I'll put a link to the book in the description below. But basically, 4 corners opposition works like this. You put your main character at the upper left corner of a rectangle, and you put opponents at the other 3 corners. Then you put all 4 sides into conflict with each other. This means that not only does your hero engage in conflict with the other 3, but the opponents themselves also engage in conflict with each other. Now let me give you an example from The Graduate. This movie opens with the main character Benjamin coming home after earning a college degree. He's trying to figure out what kind of adult he wants to be, and society, particularly his family, has expectations for him. Those expectations put pressure on him, so we'll say that society is one of the 4 corners. Then you have the story's main opponent, Mrs. Robinson. She's married to one of Benjamin's father's friends, and she attempts to seduce Benjamin one night. Eventually they hook up at a hotel, and Benjamin starts having an affair with her. At first he enjoys it, but becomes increasingly uncomfortable over time. Then finally you have Mrs. Robinson's daughter, Elaine. People constantly encourage Benjamin to date Elaine until he finally does, and she ends up being the final edge of the rectangle. And this is where the Four Corners opposition comes into focus. Benjamin is having an affair with Mrs. Robinson, then society pressures him into dating Elaine, and later when both women learn the truth about their situation, it causes a rift between mother and daughter. Add in the fact that society frowns upon Benjamin's affair with a married woman, and you have conflict firing everywhere, up, down, across, and diagonally. And this is a great strategy for getting the most out of your conflict, and it can help you see new possibilities, violent or otherwise. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is your favorite non-violent scene from a story? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers, and it's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he can't put it down till he kills 6 people with it. Also be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe, maybe even hit that thanks button for me, and as always, remember to keep on writing.